Global War 36 enthusiast here with a video prepared for my friend Mark B, who requested a video kind of explaining Lend-lease. I will first start off talking about just who can Lend-lease. National reference sheets have specific notes and restrictions on Lend-lease. For example, Italy may only Lend-lease to nations that are at war with a major power, and in addition to the Spanish nationalists during the Spanish Civil War. Note that the British Commonwealth shares Lend-lease limits. So on any given Commonwealth turn, you may Lend-lease to an unlimited number of nations. You could Lend-lease to Free France and KMT as Great Britain, for example. But ANZAC, FEC, and Great Britain may only send one unit per turn to any one particular nation. So you could not have ANZAC and the FEC both Lend-lease to the KMT, as an example. Zoom back in. Minor powers may not Lend-lease. You have to be a major power. So China, CCP, and KMT cannot Lend-lease until they evolve to a major power. The Free French similarly cannot Lend-lease. So the answer to who can Lend-lease is a major power as permitted according to their national reference sheet. The sequence of Lend-lease is during the production phase, you declare your Lend-lease, and during the place units and collect income phase, you deliver that Lend-lease. So let's start off talking about declaring Lend-lease. If you want to see the rules for this, it's 7.9 on page 32. So you have two choices. You can either Lend-lease IPPs, and the rule is up to half, and that's rounded up to half of the receiving nation's current income in IPPs, not counting any bonus income. So this is why, this particular rule is why it's smart for you to track the German income separate from the Vichy income, because if, in our current game, GoldenEye, Germany right now has 49 on the IPP tracker, and Vichy's at 4 on the IPP tracker, and Italy has 42 IPPs banked. Italy could send a maximum of 25 IPPs on turn 8.6 to Germany, because that's half of 49 rounded up. They can't send, if you track them all together, if you don't split out Vichy from Germany, then at this point you might erroneously think that Italy could Lend-lease 27 IPPs, because the tracker would have 53 instead of 49 for Germany and 4 for Vichy. So if you don't send IPPs, the other thing that you could do is you could Lend-lease one military unit. It must be built at a home country factory. I believe that Calcutta is an exception. On the national reference sheet for FEC, it specifically talks about FEC being able to Lend-lease in certain situations. So that makes me think that Calcutta is an exception to this home country factory. But normally you would need to produce that military unit at a home country factory. The unit uses factory capacity, and that's particularly important for the FEC and ANZAC when conducting Lend-lease, because they both start off with minor factories and they can only produce one unit per turn. So unless you either develop improved factories or you pay to upgrade those factories or build another factory, if FEC is Lend-leasing, say, to the KMT, then they wouldn't be able to build an additional unit in Calcutta. You can Lend-lease advanced technology units. Like a very common thing is for the USA to develop jet fighters and then Lend-lease jet fighters to other countries. Now let's talk about delivering Lend-lease, which is 11.4 on page 47. Just think about the process this way. The very first thing you should do is declare the factory that your Lend-lease was built at, because that's going to use up the factory capacity. So you might say, the mountain infantry that I'm sending to the KMT was produced in Calcutta at that factory. Then the next thing is if you go over the sea, like for example, here Bengal is not connected to Burma unless you were to build a railroad. So if you were going to go by sea, you need to name the port that you're going to embark at. So let's say that you send it by rail over here. You don't have to, even though it's going this direction, you do not have to choose the port that's closest over there. You could choose Maharashtra. So you say, I built it at this factory, it is embarking here at this port, and it's going to debark at this port in Burma. Okay, so then you have to take the shortest path between those two ports. Remember that if either of the embarking or debarking ports is a minor port, that's going to restrict you. Like if you left through this dockyard, this minor dockyard there, then you cannot send a mountain infantry. You could only send either 3 IPPs or a unit that's worth 3 IPPs. So you declare the embarking port and the debarking port, and then you have to take the shortest path between the two. If there's an alternate path, if you could choose multiple different paths that are the same length, the sending player, the person sending the Lend-lease, gets to pick. But otherwise it has to take the shortest path. So that's how you would send the delivery. Then another important rule is that once the unit arrives in home country territory for the receiving nation, it has to stop. It can't keep going. So, for example, early on in learning this game, I sent Lend-lease from Russia to Paris, or I was trying to send it to Paris, but you can't have the unit arrive in, say, Normandy or Picardy and continue on to Paris. Once it touches home country of the receiving nation, it has to stop movement. All right, let's talk about ways to counter Lend-lease. The first is interdiction, which is 11.4 on page 48. Remember that interdiction can only be used against the sending nation. So let's say that Japan is not at war with the FEC, but it is at war with the KMT, and the FEC is sending a unit to the KMT. Japan, even though it has a submarine here, and let's go back to our example where it was sending from Maharashtra around to Burma, that sub cannot stop it because it's not at war with the sending nation. It's only at war, in this particular example, with the receiving nation. Interdiction only stops the sender. So let's think about the Spanish Civil War. The countries that are sending to Spain might be Germany, Italy, and Russia. Those would be the classic ones. And they're all neutral with the Spanish nationalists and the Spanish Republicans. So even though the Spanish Republicans start off with a submarine, a coastal sub, it can't interdict that Lend-lease. It just passes right on through. When you do interdiction, what you do is you roll 2d6 with no modifiers, and the tie will go to the sender. In other words, if there's any ties, the Lend-lease passes through safely. That means there's only a 42.7% chance that interdiction will stop the Lend-lease. But if it does, if the die roll for the interdicting player is higher than the die roll for the sending player, then the Lend-lease is eliminated. So if Italy sent, say, 25 IPPs and risked it and went through past a submarine, all 25 IPPs could be destroyed by interdiction. If you have multiple units, like in this example, there's a submarine. Oh, I don't know that you could see when I was pointing out this Japanese sub here. I'm sorry. I was talking about how this Japanese sub could interdict something coming from here. Imagine if there was also a Japanese plane on map here in that sea zone. Just because you have both an interdicting map and an interdicting sub, you don't get one roll for each. The way that you get one convoy rating roll for each, you only get one roll per sea zone. But if you had one submarine here and one submarine here, and it was going from Maharashtra over to Burma, then you would get two separate rolls. So each sea zone can be its own interdiction roll rather than multiple units of different types in a particular sea zone. The things that can do interdiction are one or more enemy subs, one or more enemy aircraft on map, and 3 or more enemy surface ships. And that means that naval transports don't count. Okay, now let's talk about blockade. Blockades are different than interdiction in that they can be used against either the sender or the receiving nation. So when I'm at war with the sending nation, if FEC is sending to KMT again, if I'm at war with the sending nation, I could put 3 surface warships here and declare them to be blockading that particular port. The Lend-Lease could come out of this port then, because I have to assign 3 surface ships to each of those to block them. 3 surface warships transports can't conduct blockade. So that would be how you do blockade against the sending nation. In this particular instance, if the Lend-Lease was coming around to Burma, there's nothing that you could do if you were at peace with the sending nation and you wanted to block that port. But you could, if you were at war with the sending nation, if Japan were at war, they could blockade that port. Another example would be if the FEC sent it around here to Free France, here to Cochin, China. Let's say that Burma was taken, and the only way to get the Lend-Lease to KMT was through Cochin, China. If Japan were at war with the Free French, they could put 3 ships on blockade duty there. Still, that it could come around over to this minor port there. So I think you get the idea that you can blockade the port of debarkation by being at war with that port, or you can block the port of embarkation by being at war with a country that has that port. Let's say that I were trying to use an example where you might blockade. If somehow the Spanish Republicans had 3 ships, they could blockade 3 surface warships. They could blockade the Spanish nationalist port and prevent them from receiving Lend-Lease. That's how that would work if you're trying to blockade. There's one optional rule I can think of that applies to Lend-Lease, and that's the Himalayan air hump rule, which is 1.24 on page 12. If an aircraft is Lend-Leased via the Burma Road, roll a D12. On a roll of 11 or 12, the aircraft is eliminated. Finally, I just want to mention some tips. You can use Lend-Lease to overcome the per turn build unit or unit build limits, like 2 Marines per turn or 2 airborne turn. If ANZAC, say, wanted 3 airborne on a particular turn, and you could only build 1 in Sydney, USA and USSR could both Lend-Lease 1 airborne infantry each if you could diplomatically convince them to do so. You can begin or advance the construction on a multi-turn naval unit while at the same time sending another unit. The multi-turn naval unit only counts against your Lend-Lease limit of 1 unit per turn on the turn it is completed. And then a final tip is that you could allow Lend-Lease through to your enemy if there was some sort of diplomatic advantage. So you could actually allow someone to Lend-Lease. Let's say that if there was a rail connecting Japan to CCP, they could allow Lend-Lease through to CCP even though they're at war if there was some sort of negotiation going on. Mark B, I hope that was helpful to you. It's Christmas Eve when I'm recording this. Merry Christmas, everyone. Look forward to putting out more content in the coming year.